Let's go to our top story today and the horrific scenes that we're waking up to in Clapham in South London, where a mother and her two children were rushed to hospital after a corrosive substance was thrown at them.
Police were called to the scene just after 7:30 last night. 9 people in total, we believe, have been injured. A man fled the scene. Police are currently looking for him.
Now, we're joined by former Chief Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police, Dal Barry. Dal, welcome to the show. This is horrific. Relatively rare, though, this sort of attack, isn't it?
Yeah, it is relatively rare. I think the case of Miss Piper is perhaps the one that's in the media regarding acid being thrown. I think the reality is many of these cases involve domestic situations, and I think the police will be investigating and trying to identify the individual who they believe is responsible, who ran away from the scene. I think the emergency services, the fire brigade and the police attended. People have been taken to various trauma units, depending on the extent of their injuries, but pretty horrific. It must be incredibly frightening for the children that were involved.
And I think one of the most worrying things, of course, is the people who rushed to help were then affected by this substance, because, of course, you hear cries for help, and the natural reaction, the natural response amongst many people is to rush out and try and do something about it. If it's a dangerous weapon, then you're potentially in trouble. But when it's something like this corrosive substance, which I suppose we must assume is some kind of acid, then you could be putting yourself in harm's way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the people were incredibly brave to rush out there. I think one of the neighbours actually chased after the suspect, but I think the neighbour was wearing slippers and the man disappeared. The police will be looking for that particular individual. I think what you end up with is a situation with a knife or a gun. You know exactly what you're dealing with. When you're dealing with a corrosive substance, you don't know what kind of liquid it is. There's an assumption it's acid. We don't know what kind of acid it is, but it will cause huge amount of damage to individuals, could lead to the loss of sight, could certainly disfigure individuals. And that's why it's often used by men against women in sort of domestic situations. So I think, it's a horrific scene, and I think all of those people who attended will be affected and have seen treatment. But I think the most serious injuries are to the women and the children.
Yeah, police say that investigations are currently underway to try and identify exactly what that fluid was. And one eyewitness said that one of the victims was saying, I can't see. It's highly, highly distressing what's happened for that family currently in hospital. Now, what kind of restrictions or regulations are there on people buying highly corrosive substances? Because for a time period, attacks like this were happening on quite a frequent basis.
That's right, yeah. I mean, we've had attacks in nightclubs, we've had attacks on domestic, in gangland situations, as well as domestic situations. There are quite severe restrictions on buying acids. They have to be in particular containers. There's age restrictions on them. But unfortunately, people can get hold of these. Some of these are household items, things like bleach and things like that. So we need to find out exactly what the corrosive item is. It may be something that's lawfully available and used quite regularly, or it may be something of an industrial scale, which would have restrictions on the age and how it's kept. But it's incredibly difficult to police against these kind of items because they are so freely available and have legitimate uses.
Not just freely available, but of course easy to carry around, largely undetected. I wonder to what extent, just widening this out, because a couple of years ago there was that spate of acid attacks. Have the police successfully managed to get a grip on this around the country, or is it something that is just going underreported? Because this is obviously a very high-profile thing because it caused the closure of a road and children were involved and the like. Is this still a major problem that the police are having to deal with, or has it been dying away from the spate that we saw a couple of years back?
Yeah, I think you end up with copycats, and one of the dangers is when you have situations like this, you have copycat attacks. But these are relatively new. I think in all my 30 years of policing, I think I've dealt with one incident of where acid was used. So it's incredibly rare. Unlike knife crime, where we've lost 21 lives last year, and also in terms of gun crime. So those remain high. So I think it's relatively low. But the impact on the individuals is pretty horrific. As you said, somebody's saying, I can't see. I mean, that we don't know whether that's a temporary measure, whether that's a more permanent measure. and it's used by men against women often to disfigure them, particularly when there's breakdowns of relationships. So we don't know the exact circumstances of this, but I think they're relatively low, the numbers, but horrific for all the victims and life-changing.
Is there enough disincentive for people to know that if they are found carrying corrosive substances with intent, that they will be going to prison for as long as perhaps someone carrying a knife or a gun with intent?
I think it's relatively low. I think what happens, because they're often used in domestic abuse, kind of domestic violence situations, people have made a plan. They've decided they're going to carry it out. So I think this is on predominantly men who use this against women. So I don't think we have sufficient resources to deal with violence against women. If you look at the level of violence against women, unfortunately it continues to be very, very persistent. We lose almost 3 women every week through violence from their partners, ex-partners. So that's a huge problem. I'm making some assumptions given what we know about this situation, but ultimately I think the police will have to investigate and find out exactly what happened. But this does seem to be a targeted attack against a woman and children by somebody who they know at this stage. That seems to be the case, and the police seem to be looking for the perpetrator. They may well know who the perpetrator is. They may well issue an image or some details of who they're looking for. But it's a fairly horrific thing for people to wake up to, and for people in the street to have witnessed.
It is exactly that. Dal, thank you so much, giving us a bit more context about these type of attacks and how the police will be handling it now. As soon as we get updates, we know police are trying to apprehend the person they believe who was responsible and also identify exactly what that substance was. When we get updates, we'll bring them to you here.